Hello, everybody. Welcome back to IELTS Monkey. My name is Teacher Patrick. As always, it's very nice to see you today. Today, we're going to have a quick little video about the different question types in Writing Task 2. Whenever I start a writing lesson with my students, I always ask them to try and name all of the different types of questions. And usually they can get around 3 or 4, but they can never really answer all of them. And this is going to be really, really important because the reality is you just don't know what question you're going to get on the test. And if you're not fully prepared, it can be quite difficult, especially when you're stressed in an environment, you're under time pressure. It's going to be really important that you have spent the time to think about and prepare for the different types of questions. Another issue I often see students make is that they try to turn everything into like an opinion question, and while you do need to give your opinion in a decent number of these questions, sorry, it's not always the case. So really making sure you understand the question, you know how to approach these questions is going to do a lot for helping you get a higher score in task achievement. Yeah, we'll talk about that a lot throughout this video, but also just helping you feel more comfortable and confident in the exam. So let's go ahead and get started here. All right. So when we think about question types, what we're going to do today is we're going to discuss some of the different question types that exist. We'll take a look at the common problems, and then of course we're going to discuss how to write each of these questions. And we won't get too much into detail about the actual structure, but I'll tell you exactly like what you need to include that's going to be really important. So first of all, just some quick notes. There is no one correct way to write an essay, and any teacher that tells you there is one way you need to do it is just simply not correct. Now, there are some best practices. You do need to have a certain number of body paragraphs. You do need to write in paragraphs. You need to have an introduction with a thesis statement and a good paraphrase. And yes, you need to develop your ideas and your answers appropriately. But as long as you do this and as long as you answer the question, you'll be in pretty good shape. Like I said, there are best practices that I teach, and I am always aware of how other teachers teach as well, and I'll always give you those options because I think it's important for you to develop your own style and have something that you can be consistent with. You also really need to understand the band descriptors. This is really important. I have posted a video earlier about task achievement that I highly recommend you check out. It breaks task achievement down, which in my opinion is one of the most difficult band descriptors for many students, just because it's so easy to mess up. Right? You can get a band score 8 in coherence and cohesion, vocabulary, grammar, you get an 8, but then boom, you get a 4 in task achievement because you simply didn't answer the question or you misunderstood the question and answered something differently. So it's really important to understand that. One main idea per paragraph is all you need, and in fact, this is recommended by British Council. If you take a look at the British Council website, and when they talk about writing task 2, you'll see that they do recommend one main idea per body paragraph. If you have too many main ideas, you just simply cannot develop them. And development is an important part of task achievement. I know we keep going back to task achievement, but none of the other scores really matter unless you're answering the question appropriately, which is why we're talking about this today. And I think this is worth discussing briefly. In your IELTS exam, your scores for individual tests in writing and speaking, not reading, writing and speaking are rounded down. So if you want to get a 7 in your speaking test, if you want to get a 7 in your writing test, you need to get 7, 7, 7, 7. You can't get 1, 6. That's going to be a 6.5. However, on the other side of things, if we're talking about the test as a whole, if you get a 7 in listening, a 7 in reading, a 7 in writing, and a 6 in speaking, for example, well, in this case, then your score will be rounded up and it will be an overall 7. But I wanted to make this clear because I think some students still aren't aware that this is what happens. Okay, let's jump into our different question types now. So first and foremost, we obviously have opinion essays, right? Here it says nowadays distance learning programs have gained in popularity, but some people argue that online courses can never be as good as those taken at college or university. So in my opinion, a best practice, not necessarily what you have to do, but a best practice is always to choose one side. Students get into trouble sometimes when they try to talk about both sides because they don't necessarily give a clear opinion. They kind of do this thing where they say, I both agree and disagree equally. And we really can't do that, right? We really have to give a clear opinion one way or the other, whether we agree or disagree. Now, I'm not saying you cannot partially agree. I'm not saying that at all. I think it's totally fine. And in fact, sometimes, honestly, like you literally cannot think of two reasons why you agree or two reasons why you disagree, especially if, you're stressed or whatever. So it's fine. But you can never be 50-50. You can never say I agree and disagree equally. This is a big problem, big mistake. Don't do it. Don't sit on the fence, one leg over one side, one leg over the other side. You've always got to be leaning one way or the other. So if you're going to partially agree, I need you to think in terms of 51-49%. 51% at least for one side, so one side is stronger. We'll talk more about this when we talk about thesis statements, but remember, you cannot be 50-50, you cannot agree and disagree equally. That's not actually an opinion. And then remember, one main idea per paragraph is all you need. It's all good. Just remember to fully develop these main ideas. If you have too many of them, again, you risk getting a lower score on task achievement because you're not able to fully develop any one main idea, and this is really important. All right, positive and negative trend. Today, many people use the internet and smartphones to transfer money to friends, family, and businesses. Is this a positive or a negative trend? Fairly simple, similar to an agree-disagree. I recommend choosing one side. It's either 100% positive or it's 100% negative. But remember, it's not the only way. You can do kind of partially, even though there are some positives. I do believe overall it's negative. And also keep in mind, most of my students are trying to go for a 7, 7.5. But if you're trying to get an 8 and an 8.5, yeah, you will want to talk about the negative sides, even though your overall view is positive. So this is why I try to stay away from, okay, you have to do it 100%. It's just that if you're going for a 7, doing it 100%, one side or the other, will usually get the job done. And I'm a big fan of trying to do what we need to do to get the score we need. But just remember, you can never be 50-50. You can never say, I believe it both equally has positive and negative trends. We don't want to do that. Discuss both views and give your opinion. So this one can be a little bit tricky for some students. And in order to get a 6 or higher on task achievement, you need to do 3 things. You need to objectively talk about the side. Let's read the question first, sorry. Some people feel that equality between the genders has already been achieved, while others feel there is considerable progress to be made. Discuss both views and give your opinion. So you need to do 3 things. You need to obviously give your opinion. And I always recommend students give their opinion in the introduction and the conclusion. We'll see that in a second. But you also need to objectively talk about the side who believes we have achieved gender equality in this world. And then you need to objectively talk about the side who believes we have not achieved gender equality in this world. You need to think about yourself as this news reporter, going in between the two sides, asking one side what they believe, why they believe it. Do they have any examples to help support this? This is one of your body paragraphs. And talking about the other side, walking over to them and seeing what they believe and asking them questions and having them provide examples, things like that. As I mentioned earlier, I do always recommend giving your opinion directly in the introduction and then again in the conclusion. And this really helps make sure your examiner knows what your position is, and it helps you to secure that higher score on task achievement. And some some teachers will say, be careful, don't give your opinion in the main body paragraphs. And I don't believe this is necessarily correct. I think it's fine to do so if you do it in a way like this, where you introduce, these are examples of topic sentences. And by the way, on the one hand, on the other hand, these are great cohesive devices for this specific type of question. Earlier, we talked a little bit about consistency. When you start practicing these individual questions, start figuring out what works for each question and then do it consistently. This will help make sure you can get higher scores across the board because you'll be doing the same best practices over and over and over again. In our case here, on the one hand, some argue that, and then you paraphrase the view you disagree with. On the other hand, I agree with those who believe this is the next topic sentence in your next body paragraph, and then you paraphrase the view you agree with. So this is a way you can incorporate your opinion into your essays. Now, some teachers like to teach that you should write the weaker side first. This is how I teach, right? Some teachers say you should write the stronger side first and end with the weaker side. Either way is fine, right? Just as long as you are answering the question and supporting your arguments. Advantages outweigh disadvantage. So this is actually more of an opinion question than anything. Be careful about turning this into just advantages and disadvantages. I see a lot of students do this. And if you do that, you're answering a different question and you're risking getting a 4 on task achievement. So in this, you are actually giving your opinion about what you believe is better. So it has been suggested that children should learn how to grow vegetables and keep animals. Do the advantages of this outweigh the disadvantages? So you make your big list of advantages. You make your big list of disadvantages. And you say the advantages of doing this is that they build responsibility and they learn how to care about nature and they learn patience. And the disadvantages might be it's dirty, it's messy, it costs a lot of money, you need some space. And also maybe they fall behind in their schoolwork. Now be careful. It's not, there are more disadvantages than advantages. Therefore, I believe the disadvantages outweigh. We're not saying quantity of advantages or disadvantages. We're saying whether we believe it's still worth it for kids to grow vegetables and keep animals despite the fact that it's expensive and dirty and costs money and whatever it may be. So, just remember, you're giving an opinion here, and you never can be 50-50. You never, ever can be 50-50. You have to be 51-49, okay? Now, again, I always believe that writing the weaker side in your first body paragraph is better, but, it's up to you, and you can change it around just as long as you answer the question. Now we go to strictly advantages and disadvantages. These days, people spend more and more time in work and less time at home. Again, you want to be careful here. Don't turn this into an agree-disagree essay. Don't say, I agree that these are the advantages and why. No. You don't need to give your opinion, although it's okay in your thesis statement to introduce with the cohesive device of, in my opinion, that's fine, but you're not actually saying you agree or disagree. So saying something like, in my opinion, spending more time at work means you can earn more money and also improve faster in your career. However, it comes at the cost of time with friends and family and maybe some more stress and anxiety. And then in your first body paragraph, you're just going to say that these are the advantages: more money, more chance for promotion, here's why, here's how. And in the second body paragraph, you say, here are the disadvantages: less time with family, more stress, more anxiety. But you are not going to say, I agree with one side or the other. You don't need to do that. Problem and solution, fairly straightforward. You're going to give 1 or 2 paragraphs talking about the problems. Why 2? Well, if you have 2 main problems, you have 1 main idea for 1 body paragraph and 1 main idea for your second body paragraph and your solution in the third body paragraph. That's totally fine. So then in that case, you would have between 4 and 5 body paragraphs, okay? But fairly simple, fairly straightforward. In my opinion, these are the problems, and to solve this, here's what we need to do. That's your thesis statement. Then you go ahead and follow your thesis statement throughout your body paragraphs. Cause and effect, going to be quite similar. treated the same as a problem and solution. One paragraph will talk about the causes of a certain situation or phenomenon, and the next body paragraph will talk about its effects. But be careful, some students get confused a little bit and they start thinking cause is the same as problem somehow in their mind when they're under some stress, and then they end up giving solutions instead of effects. So again, just be really careful. Oh yeah, and don't turn this into an agree or disagree question. Finally, double questions, almost done. There is more and more outrage and anger common in society today. Why is this? And is this a positive or negative development? So, in your first body paragraph, you need to clearly state what the reason is. If you have two reasons, you can give two main body paragraphs. The first reason is this. Here's why. Here's an example. Here's a result. Next body paragraph. The second reason is this. Here's why. Here's an explanation. Here's an example. Here's a result. And then your third body paragraph. Here's why it's a positive trend, or here's why it's a negative trend, and here are my supports. Just make sure you're very clear in your thesis statement. You're very clear in answering both sides. If you just say the reasons, you cannot get higher than a 5 in task achievement. If you just talk about positive or negative development, you cannot get higher than a 5 in task achievement. So make sure you do it all. Okay, so today was just a little bit of an introduction to the question types in writing task 2. Make sure you read the question carefully. We'll talk later about how to interpret questions. Every single word is important, and if you don't recognize that, it could lead you into some trouble areas. So again, we'll review that at a later date. But at a minimum, start thinking about the different types of questions you can get. Start thinking about how you would plan for these types of questions, because planning is really important. And just remember, not everything is going to be an opinion question. And as much as you think you might be getting an opinion question, it is not guaranteed. I hope today was helpful. Please leave a comment if you have any questions, or if you have any recommendations for future topics you would like me to talk about. I'm happy to make a video for you guys. I'm loving how this Facebook page is growing, and I'm hoping to continue to bring you quality content that you can actually use in your preparation for the IELTS exam. Thank you so much, and as always, I will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.